Hey friends, here we are back on a Wednesday to do the Bellringer here in Mr. Kovac's Living Environment class, and I know you're looking very much forward to that, so let's continue with the review, shall we? Bellringer. All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovac's class. It's Mr. Kovac's class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovac's class.
It's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovac's class.
And he's super cool.
It's Mr. Kovac's class. Hey, we just started looking at cells again, especially the cell membrane, right? A typical cell, all cells have a membrane, and you know that the membrane controls what goes into and out of the cell. Membrane's made up of phospholipid bilayer, which is insoluble in water, hydrophobic, and it's got proteins embedded in it that do a bunch of different tasks, including maybe facilitated diffusion, maybe active transport, those kinds of things. Let's remember what's inside the cell, of course, we call this a eukaryotic cell because it's got organelles. And we learned in class that the cell functions much like a factory, in that the cells make products, right? And then they have to package and ship those products out to other cells. My model of the cell factory, right? You've got parts that come into the factory. They have to be let in through the cell membrane, right? And so in some ways, the cell membrane is like receiving parts, things like amino acids and things like that, right? Then they have to be brought to the assembly line, the workers that actually put the pieces together. That's the job of ribosomes. If you remember, they put proteins together. Then they push those proteins to the Golgi, where it's packaged. And then it either goes into a vacuole and hangs around in storage, or it's shipped out, back out through the cell membrane, right? So cells are like factories. They bring raw materials in, they assemble proteins, they package the proteins, and then they ship them out. Okay. Now there's some peripheral jobs too, right? Like the factory needs power. That's the job of the mitochondrion, right? The factory needs custodial services. That's the job of the lysosome. And then of course, most eukaryotic cells, or all eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, which is where they don't ever touch the product, but they have all the plans on how to make the product, right? That's the main office where the boss, DNA, right? DNA sends a copy of the plans, his secretary, mRNA, out to the ribosomes, and they follow the plans and they make proteins by putting the amino acids together. Cells like a factory. On the main office, or in the main office of the factory, which we call the nucleus, you've got the CEO, the secretary, and then I call them HR, human resources. The CEO is chromatin, the boss, DNA. It's got the plans, knows what to make, how much to make, when to make it, those kinds of things. His secretary, communication mouthpiece, is the secretary. That's mRNA, a messenger RNA, which is just a copy of each plan, right? And then in eukaryotic cells, workers are made in the nucleus. They're made in a little darkened part of the nucleus called the nucleolus. On the factory floor, you have the assembly line workers, the ribosomes. They put the pieces together. They're the workers, right? You have Golgi, whose job is to package. And then you have tRNA, transfer RNA, which transfers the parts to the workers. Right? That happens on the factory floor. Some other ancillary type factory floor workers. There's power supply, mitochondrion, maintenance, the lysosomes, and then storage, like warehouse managers, storage, is the vacuole. Those also happen in the cytoplasm. And then if you think of it like a factory, right, you've got the cell membrane. The cell membrane's job is security, control what goes in and out. Right? Shipping, control what goes out, what comes in. And then advertising, you've got to have proteins embedded in you that tell other cells what you're all about and what you have and what your antigens, those kinds of things, right? So we've got lots of different jobs inside the cell. They're all done by organelles inside the cell. Let's see what you can remember. Micrograph, taken of a cell with an electron microscope, okay? This circle right here, that's the part that controls the making of proteins. What do we call that part? Out here in the cytoplasm, these little dots, These are where the proteins are assembled. Proteins are assembled. What do we call that part? You're in the cytoplasm. You see this kind of C crescent shaped part? This is where proteins are packaged. They're wrapped up into tiny vesicles. What do we call that part? This is a plant cell. This is a plant cell. Here's a huge, huge storage area. What do we call that part? Floating around in the cytoplasm. It's pretty interesting because it has its own DNA as well. This is the powerhouse of the cell. What do we call that part? Big picture, because this is an electron micrograph of the maintenance worker actually coming up next to a mitochondrion, merging its cell membrane, its membrane, right? And it's dumping digestive enzymes into that mitochondrion. What's the name of that part? The maintenance. Contains digestive enzymes, hydrolytic enzymes. All right, so think of the cell, the eukaryotic cell, as a factory that makes proteins. Different cells make different proteins. Stomach factories make pepsin. How do they make pepsin? The boss, the DNA, knows the instructions. He sends a copy of the instructions out to the assembly line. The assembly line looks at the copy of instructions and says, oh, we need amino acids. The parts manager brings amino acids to the assembly line. They stick them together piece by piece by piece by piece by piece. When they get to the end, they're told to stop. They put it on a conveyor belt and it goes to Golgi, which wraps it up in a little vesicle. Then that vesicle is moved to the storage area so it can wait till it's time to do something with it. And then if it's time to ship it out, like pepsin's case, because of meals come high in protein, send it back to the cell membrane and they dump it out into the lumen of the stomach and you get to digest that hot dog. All right, cells.